podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is TWiT, This Week in Enterprise Tech, episode 437, recorded April 2nd, 2021. IT Business Playground Boundaries.
This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Bandwidth, a cloud-native carrier with a global network offering SIP trunking, toll-free, E911, and messaging services. Centralize telecom services and successfully migrate communications to the cloud with the telecom power behind the majority of Gartner's UCaaS and CCaaS Magic Quadrant leaders. Learn more at bandwidth.com/enterprise. And by IT Pro TV. Expand the skills of your IT team and get them the up-to-date certificates they need. Visit itpro.tv/enterprise for an additional 30% off all consumer subscriptions for the lifetime of your active subscription. Use code ENTERPRISE30 at checkout. And by Worldwide Technology and Dell Technologies. WWT's Advanced Technology Center is a virtual testing and research lab with the best engineers in the industry. WWT's ATC provides customers unbiased results so they know they're making the right technology decisions for their organizations. To learn more and see what they can do for you, go to wwt.com/twit.
Welcome to This Week in Enterprise Tech, your guide to everything important, interesting, and, well, just plain fascinating in the world of enterprise technology. I'm your host for this week, Curt Franklin, Senior Analyst at Omdia, and I'll be joined by one of my favorite people, my co-host, Brian Chee, along with a guest who's going to bring us some wisdom, some knowledge, some fascinating insight on some of the things that are absolutely critical to today's enterprise technology. Before I get started, though, do want to reach way across the universe to talk to my co-host, Brian Chee. Brian, what's going on in your corner of the TWiT-verse today?
Well, you know, I am really looking forward to closing on our new house next week, and looking forward to that. But you know what's more fun? There's a really good chance either next Tuesday or Thursday, schedules depending, we're going to go and take a grand tour of Give Kids the World. It's a kind of a Make-A-Wish type of thing in Central Florida, over in the Kissimmee area. And we're going to go and see if we can go and lend a hand and volunteer. It looks like an amazing charity, and I'm really looking forward to my tour.
You know, Give Kids the World is something that I know a bit about. We're familiar with their CIO as a member of the Makerspace that we belong to, and that is an absolutely fabulous place to be. You know, if you've never heard of Give Kids the World, when kids and their families come to Central Florida on a Make-A-Wish trip to do things like go to Disney World, go to Universal, do all of that sort of stuff, they have to stay somewhere. And more often than not, the place they stay is Give Kids the World Village, because it's set up to be a safe place where they can, to the extent possible, just be a kid and not have to worry about being a patient while they're taken care of in some really incredible ways. So lots of props to what they do over there. And Brian, I know you're going to have an absolutely great time. Well, we've got a whole great show to get to, including a fascinating guest. But before we do that, let's bring you some blips. Universities across the country are being swept up in a large data, fiasco. According to Lucas Ropek, reporting for Gizmodo, a number of prominent U.S. colleges have become the newest unlucky recipients of a cybersecurity migraine currently affecting dozens of organizations all over the world. You see, a lot of organizations previously used Excelion's file transfer product FTA to store and share data. It had big security flaws, and a pitiless hacker gang decided to exploit those flaws to steal data from dozens of organizations, including, apparently, schools. About half a dozen universities, including Stanford University, the University of Maryland, Baltimore, University of Miami, University of California, Merced, University of Colorado, Boulder, and the Yeshiva University recently announced that they have been swept up in the hack. Now, those schools also appear to have had some of their data leaked online by the hackers in an apparent bid to get them to pay the ransom. Schools are natural targets for attacks because they are giant warehouses of information, personal, academic, and financial, all of which can be stolen and exploited. Among the lessons to be learned here are that storing great quantities of personal data carries with it the requirement that the data be securely stored. Maybe some of these universities could ask some major financial organizations for a little bit of tutoring.
Well, Google Maps is apparently getting augmented reality indoor navigation with a new eco-friendly route option. Well, Google Maps has announced a slew of new features coming soon, ranging from on-map weather updates to AR-powered indoor navigation. There's a lot to cover, and the company says it's on track to deliver over 100 AI-powered improvements to Google Maps this year. First, there's a list of a new UI for directions. Today, the direction UI uses tabs for each transportation type. One for driving, then mass transit, walking, ride shares, and biking. In this redesign, everything appears in a flat list, but now you can hit the options button and set preferred modes of transportation. You can prioritize routing options for driving, walking, trains, buses, motorcycles, bikes, ride shares, bike and scooter shares, and ferries. You can even pick multiple items, so all your top choices will be first in the list. Some of the route options will have a little green leaf next to them, which is supposedly going to indicate ecological options. Anyway, we're kind of had a late start, so I'm going to jump ahead. There's a cool thing about this. With the AI integrated within the Google Maps, we're going to be able to have a little bit more intelligent ways of doing things. So Google will be able to change things more rapidly and start taking into account that sometimes you're going to have multiple ways of getting from one place to another. And the AR having directions indoors is something that is been a holy grail for a lot of things, because we all know GPS doesn't work indoors. So anyway, I had a project at university to do some kind of displays that you might see at some of the major shopping malls, where you point to a shop that you want and it'll give you a walking path. Well, we wanted to do the same thing on our university campus, which is not a small piece of property. So we not only wanted to display the path, but we wanted to go and pop up a QR code that will then allow your phone to snap a picture of it and give you your walking path. With AR, that becomes even better. And with AR, that also means some other really interesting options start popping up, especially for the sight impaired or hearing impaired. AR and AI have some really huge potentials for all kinds of different things. And I really applaud Google for spending so much time on this and also working on the sight and hearing impaired.
Well, enterprises remain riddled with overprivileged users. Worse yet, attackers know it. Last month, the breach of an administrative account at video service provider Verkada left the firm's customers, among them Tesla and Cloudflare, open to surveillance by online intruders. Verkada's cloud video service appears to have allowed super users unrestricted access to customer video streams and cameras, allowing a single breach to have massive impact. Similarly, through the compromise of the update process for SolarWinds Orion remote management software, attackers gained complete access to customer systems because Orion, by default, had complete access. Hey, you didn't think you'd get a week without a mention of SolarWinds, did you? More than a third of the companies, or 37%, have detected overprivileged accounts, according to the Oracle and KPMG Cloud Threat Report 2020. These credentials are in attackers' sites as well, with 59% of the surveyed companies suffering an attack where privileged credentials were phished. And it's not just humans. While companies often give users too many privileges, often the problem is that applications, especially legacy applications, typically require high-level privileges. How big a problem is it? 56% of critical vulnerabilities reported in Microsoft software in 2020 could have been mitigated by removing administrative rights, according to access management firm Beyond Trust. To combat privilege creep, companies need to first discover the degree to which administrative accounts, management APIs, and system processes are a problem on their on-premise and cloud environments. Some of that discovery can be done in Active Directory by looking for specific groups or members that have certain rights, like password reset authority, administrative access to cloud accounts, or the ability to manage organizational units.
Well, our friends at AT&T are lobbying against proposals to subsidize fiber-to-the-home development across the U.S., arguing that rural people don't need fiber and should be satisfied with internet service that provides only 10 megabit per second upload speeds. AT&T Executive VP Joan Marsh detailed the company's stance last Friday in a blog post titled "Defining Broadband for the 21st Century." AT&T's preferred definition of the 21st century broadband could be met with wireless technology, or AT&T's VDSL, a 14-year-old system that brings fiber to neighborhoods but uses copper telephone wires for the final connections into each home. Quote, there would be significant additional costs to deploy fiber to virtually every home and small business in the country, when at present there is no compelling reason that those expenditures are justified over the service quality of a 50/10 or a 100/20 megabits per second product, AT&T wrote. That would be 50 meg download with 10 meg upload, or 100 meg download with 20 meg uploads. AT&T said that overbuilding areas that already have acceptable speeds would, quote, needlessly devalue private investment and waste broadband-directed dollars, unquote. Overbuilding is what the broadband industry calls one ISP building in an area already served by another ISP, whereas internet users desperate for cheaper, faster, or more reliable service call that broadband competitions. By the way, Democrats are pushing for the 100 meg down, 100 meg up in rural areas. Anyway, this is a great story, and it starts talking about the other side. Yes, fiber is really expensive, but we've all started to see what's happening during the pandemic. So realistically, I agree only slightly. What we really need is reliable, jitter-free broadband. I've recently experienced some early 5G service, and while it is reporting speeds well within what AT&T says is adequate, the reality is the jitter is so bad that even something as forgiving as streaming TV has been inadequate. In my opinion, 10 meg per second could be adequate only if latency, jitter, and out-of-order packets were minimized. But sadly, I've not experienced anything close to reliable from any broadband provider in either Hawaii or Florida, and the help I gave my buddy Oliver in New Jersey was an experience in frustration. So in reality, neither Congress nor AT&T are correct, in my opinion. Yes, we could substitute more speed for badly optimized broadband, and yes, we could go with much lower speeds if the pathways were optimized. I'm thinking a combination of both might be better to be on that wish list.
Well, AWS has named Adam Selipsky as its next CEO to succeed Andy Jassy. The reins of AWS will rest in the familiar hands of Adam Selipsky, who will return to the web services provider as Andy Jassy becomes CEO of parent Amazon. Jassy sent an email to the AWS staff naming Selipsky, who is currently CEO of Tableau Software, as the heir apparent. The news follows the February announcement of Jassy succeeding Jeff Bezos, who plans to hand over the CEO spot to become Amazon's executive chairman. Now, Jassy and Selipsky have both served as CEO for about the same length of time at their current respective organizations, and their individual experiences may speak to the path forward for AWS. Analysts and pundits are watching for signs that AWS might push into the new market segments or solidify its position in current markets as Microsoft, Alibaba, and Google are gaining ground. Well, that's going to do it for the blips. We have bites coming up, but before we do, well, I just couldn't go through a week without hearing Lou's voice, and I think he's got something to tell us about a sponsor.
Well, thank you, guys. I will get you back to more enterprise goodness in just a minute. But before I do have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Bandwidth. Now, many of you have old legacy systems as well as new SIP systems as well, and you have people moving offices and working remotely, and there's lots of questions when it comes to these services, like what happens with emergency services? Bandwidth provides communication services built for innovative enterprises. SIP and emergency services infused with the power of software create smoother migrations and a more innovation-ready platform for your cloud future. Centralized SIP with a cloud-native carrier. Now, years of organic growth, mergers, and acquisitions have resulted in a complex tapestry of legacy infrastructure, making getting to these new cloud platforms more complicated. Centralized SIP with a trusted partner is a critical first step. Bandwidth's software-driven approach to SIP empowers enterprises with an unmatched level of control and visibility that includes triggered or scheduled porting, real-time number ordering and provisioning, as well as call control features such as failover, call forwarding, and real-time reroutes. Solve for E911 needs. Capturing precise location information at call time is critical for your organization, but converting PRI lines and centralizing SIP can jeopardize access to accurate location information and maintain compliance with emergency regulations. Manage evolving regulatory requirements, multiple offices, and nomadic workers with Bandwidth's emergency services built for the modern mobile workforce. Protect your enterprise and your employees with precise location information and easily add or change address information. Access a variety of options, including both static and advanced or dynamic E911 options. Work with a network operator who's just easier to do business with. Everyone says they have great support, but we show it through our 98% CSAT score and consistent SLA attainment by our support teams. With Bandwidth's unmatched industry support, every customer receives named implementation specialists to usher you through a tailored migration plan, a dedicated team of porting experts so you have an easy migration experience, dedicated support personnel and industry experts to manage needs as you scale over time, 24/7 network monitoring assurance by our in-house network operations centers, clear and always available escalation paths, and customer-driven prioritization of support tickets. Plus Zoom, Genesys, and RingCentral all use Bandwidth. Duet for Microsoft Teams is for those enterprises contemplating migrating their telecom to Microsoft Teams. It's the only comprehensive solution for direct routing and Microsoft-certified E911 available direct from a carrier. Simplify your Teams migration and save an average of 40% compared to Microsoft calling plans. As the telecom power behind the majority of Gartner's UCaaS and CCaaS Magic Quadrant leaders, Bandwidth is best positioned to help your enterprise centralize telecom services and successfully migrate communications to these cloud platforms. Learn more at bandwidth.com/enterprise. That's bandwidth.com/enterprise. And we thank Bandwidth for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now back to you guys.
Well, this week's bite, we get to talk about a breaking story. So the basics on this is our friends at Ubiquiti had a cloud management system for their Internet of Things, routers, network video recorders, security cameras, and they disclosed they had a breach. Now, the person broke the story to Krebs on Security, and that's where this article comes from, and they're going to call the person that broke the story Adam. Well, let's go over this. So in the original story, according to Adam, the hackers obtained full read-write access to Ubiquiti's database at Amazon Web Services, which was allegedly, quote, third party, unquote, involved in the breach. Ubiquiti's breach disclosure, he wrote, was, quote, downplayed and purposely written to imply that a third-party cloud vendor was at risk and that Ubiquiti was merely a casualty of that instead of the target of the attack. In reality, Adam said, the attackers gained administrative access to Ubiquiti's servers at Amazon's cloud server, which secures the underlying server hardware and software, but requires the cloud tenant, the client, to secure access to any data stored there. Quote, they were able to get cryptographic secrets for single sign-on cookies and remote access, full source code control contents, and signing keys exfiltration, according to Adam. Well, it was a bad show. And it goes on. Even though the security engineers removed the backdoor account in the first week of January, the intruders responded by sending a message saying they wanted 50 Bitcoin, $2.8 million US, in exchange for a promise to remain quiet about the breach. Attackers also provided proof they'd stolen Ubiquiti's source code and pledged to disclose the location of another backdoor if their ransom was not met. Ubiquiti didn't engage with the hackers, and we'll see what that goes. Good article. Krebs did a great job. But this starts bringing up some interesting points, and it's going to give us a nice segue to talk to our guest. So, are we depending too heavily on automation? And maybe, just maybe, we're not paying enough attention to make sure we have enough internal skills. Because when you start going through the story, you start learning a lot more about, someone started throwing some stuff around and had some default passwords. And it reminds me, that's also the same thing that happened in the Simply Safe issue. So, Curt, in the corporate world, are we ever going to have enough money to hire all the IT talent that we ever wanted? What do you think?
No, simple answer is no. Especially if you're talking about IT talent that is knowledgeable about security, safety, privacy, all those good things. We're going to have to lean on some automation, some intelligent automation, often some partners who can centralize the talent and education that we need. But it seems to me that Ubiquiti is working awfully hard to pass the buck on this one. I mean, genuinely, there are a whole series of things that had to go wrong, starting with having accounts that had more privileges than they need, then not protecting those accounts, not finding out what was going on before lateral damage and lateral spreading had occurred. This is one where you could take any one of those things, fix it, and you might have dramatically reduced the damage. But when you add all of them together, you've got a big ball of problems. And I think Ubiquiti's is going to roll downhill for a while to come. What do you think?
Well, I think there's some salt in that wound. Because apparently our friends at Ubiquiti didn't turn on logging for certain features. And so now they don't quite know how much got exfiltrated. So one of the things I'm going to throw out, this is just helpful hints. Syslog, while it is cumbersome and while syslogs get, logging files get huge and they're really, really hard to sort through, not having them is worse. So we've had a guest on the show previously. We like Splunk. Splunk does a really nice job of allowing you to index those syslog files so that you have a chance at actually seeing things going. I'm going to bring this topic up with our guest because this is one of those things where you start getting into, should we have people trained in how to diagnose things, how to look at logs, how to find the forest from the trees, so to speak. And I think that's one of the things that I keep getting up on a soapbox. Now, we all know what's going on. You know, there's been some bean counters in there saying we need to cut the costs, and so let's maybe this person isn't quite as valuable as he thinks he is, or whatever. I think this is a perfect time for me to toss it back to Curt. So, well, toss it to Lou, actually. We're going to go do the next commercial, not next sponsor. And I really want to dig into this with our guest, because that's actually the whole topic. Are we depending too much on automation? Are we too attracted to these shiny toys? What should we be doing? And it just happens to be our guest is from Rackspace, which is also a huge cloud provider. And, let's go start off with that sponsor. So, Lou, let's go do the next ad.
Well, thank you, guys. I'll get you back to your enterprise and tech news. But before we do have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is IT Pro TV. Now, whether you run a business or you're looking to be employed, you know that you constantly have to stay up to date on the latest trends in your field of expertise. The same goes for IT teams. Build your IT team to be ready for any challenge with IT Pro TV. Not only can you get your team the most recent certificates and training in IT, but you can also make sure they stay on track. Track your team's results. Prove the ROI of your training spend with the Pro Portal. Manage your seats, assign and unassign team members, and access monthly usage reports. See metrics like logins, viewing time, courses viewed, tracks completed, and more. Easily manage your teams. Manage subsets of users or teams by providing them with customized assignments, monitoring progress, and reporting on the usage of the platform. Assignments can be full courses or individual episodes within courses. Choose to download data in a convenient CSV for more advanced reporting. Get advanced reporting. Get immediate insight into your team's viewing patterns and progress over any period of time with visual reports. Dynamic reports are updated weekly, monthly, and quarterly. Sign up for email alerts to be notified when reports are ready. Your team's detailed viewing activity is at your fingertips in a CSV download for any report type. Individuals and teams will have fun while they learn. With 7 studios and over 5,800 hours of engaging video training and fun edutainers, IT Pro TV is the best online IT training platform to keep your employees motivated. IT Pro TV is focusing on Linux for the month of April. They'll be having 2 Linux-related webinars and a Linux free weekend on April 17th through 18th. And if you've been checking out IT Pro TV's podcast Tech NATO with Don Pizzette, they're celebrating the 200th episode of the podcast on April 22nd with a live show and giveaways. You don't want to miss it. If you're interested in learning IT or getting certified for the IT job you want, you'll absolutely benefit from IT Pro TV. Start or advance your IT career today. Go to itpro.tv/enterprise and use code enterprise30 to receive 30% off all consumer subscriptions. That's itpro.tv/enterprise and use code enterprise30 for an additional 30% off for the lifetime of your active subscription. IT Pro TV. Build or expand your IT career and enjoy the journey. And we thank IT Pro TV for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now back to you guys.
Thanks, Lou. And we're glad to be back with what is almost always the best part of the show. I think this time it's absolutely going to be the best part. Our guest today is Jeff DeVerter, who is CTO of Rackspace. Jeff, welcome to TWiT.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me on. Big fan of the show, big fan, and glad to be here today to get to visit with you.
Well, we've got a lot of things we want to talk about because you're at a position that lets you see a lot of what's going on in the industry. But before we dive into those things, one of the traditions here on TWiT is getting our guests origin story. How did you end up in the CTO's office at Rackspace?
Well, it was a twisted road to get here. So let me tell you how that happened. And so I got into tech I've been in it kind of forever. My father was a lifer with IBM. We had the first, 8086 PC as they came off the line in our house as a middle schooler. And now I'm giving away my age, but that's okay. And so it was always part of kind of who I was and what I did. Now, first career actually wasn't in tech. I ran down a music road and was an engineer in a recording studio and did a bunch of production there, but ultimately made my way back into technology and started as a lot of people did. I took what I had as a base and went down the Microsoft road and got my MCSE back in the mid '90s, and from there went and worked with several large organizations EDS comes to mind was one of them. Worked with as a systems engineer and as a manager of a Roadrunner. Remember the broadband system that ultimately got bought up and is underpinning of a lot of the cable services today. But I found my way at one point while working in financial services into a little program that really was the bane of a lot of people's existence, and but yet has become so integral to what we do today, and that's SharePoint. This is back in the early 2000s, and so I got smart in SharePoint. Got poached by another consulting company, by a financial services company. I live in Texas, in the San Antonio area, and I got really good at it, and I learned something at this point. SharePoint was one of these tools that worked great when it worked. And when it worked great, it did that for a really long time. But then something would happen. Some update would occur. Something would go bump in the night, and it would get twitchy. Well, a good friend of mine was leading one of the main service lines at Rackspace, and he said, "Hey, come have lunch. We're thinking about building a multi-tenant offering." And I said, "All right, I'll come have lunch. I'll talk to you, give you my 2 cents in it." And as I learned more about what they were thinking, they wanted to build this big multi-tenant here. Had $10 a drink for it. And as I learned more about Rackspace and what they were good at, well, it's all things Windows. It was all things servers, all things Linux, making servers run better there than they could anywhere else. And I was having trouble with this organization I was working in and as an architect at this point, I'm a domain architect for this 30,000 employee company. And though I'm probably the smartest person at the tech in the company, I wasn't in the system admin group, so I couldn't touch the server. So I said to my friend Taylor, I said, "Taylor, if you built a business and a team where you had some of the smartest people in the world trained in the app and how to install and configure and manage and maintain it, and that's all they did was solve those problems from sun up to sun up, well, that would be great value." And as it turns out, they said, "Well, I think that's a great idea and you should come do that." So they hired me to come in, run that business, build that business for them. And that's really where I started my career back in 2008 at Rackspace. And from there, it was very successful. I did the same thing with Exchange. I did the same thing with Skype for Business at the time. I launched their Microsoft private cloud business. I launched their Azure support business. And it was all predicated on, how can we take these rackers who are smart at what they do and enable these businesses to be able to go out and do what they do. And that is whatever their business is, fulfill their mission. Rackspace's mission is we're a group of technologists who enable our customers to achieve their future, which is really exciting. So we rally now around this message of how can we understand what your business outcomes are and be really some of the smartest people in tech in the world and put those two things together. So I find myself now as the CTO inside of our solutions team. I'm the chief technology evangelist for the company as well as leading strategy. And it puts us in this position where now we get to look at what's coming out from these cloud providers, from Amazon, from Microsoft, from Google, what's coming in private cloud, what's happening in security, where are the breaches happening, and you guys asked some great questions as you're giving the blips before, and there really does require this. The pace of technology is moving so fast these days that no one can really honestly keep up with it. And I was thinking, what's that one bit I'm going to tell you when you come back to me? And it really is that companies just have to have a very honest view of themselves and where they excel. And if they want to go down and own this as much as possible, do it. But still have somebody come in and look at your work. It helps to have somebody look over your shoulder, check your work, look at your architectural plans, make sure there isn't something that was missed, like turning on logging. That was a big miss.
We can agree that hindsight, I'm sure they would have turned that particular switch on long ago. Now, I do have a question, because you talked about all of the different options. I mean, there's everything from on-premises hosting of your, you own the iron, you own the applications, you own everything, all the way up to a fully cloud-hosted solution, maybe from Salesforce or SAP, or maybe something that is hosted with a company like yours, where you can have essentially anything as a service, and you can also tie that back to on-prem stuff. You can tie it to someone's cloud solution. I'm sure you even work with other hosting providers for some companies to get all of this going. So with that in mind, we have had stories today and here on TWiT for the past few weeks about organizations that got hacked in a horrible way. And the first thing they start doing is pointing fingers. Well, it's not our fault. It's because we got this over here and we got that over there. And it's really their fault. So in this very dynamic, very complex environment, how do you figure out who's responsible, not just for security, but for performance? I mean, if you've got an application with an SLA that says, you're going to see a cursor return after 1.2 seconds at the max, who's responsible for that in one of these huge complex applications?
So, Curtis, that's a great question, and there's so much to unpack in it. I think my first observation is, in these types of things, it's really rarely ever just one thing, isn't it? It's a collection of things that went wrong. No one big disaster is ever one big disaster. It's a missed logging here. It's a gateway open there. It's a port open over here. And those things become what ultimately becomes a terrible situation that no organization ever wants to go through. And so what you find is, what companies have to really realize is they've got to be pragmatic and they've got to be honest about what occurred as well. And the ownership always goes back to them as the organization, whether they've used a third party, whether they wrote it themselves. Ultimately, they made a decision at some point, and whether they had the right oversight or not the right oversight. Now, there still is, you still can go back and you can say, my vendor had this issue, but who chose the vendor? You chose the vendor. And so that really where it goes back to, you've got 2 points there. You've got how do we deal with the security aspect and unraveling that. And then there's, how do you look at the performance? So one of this drives towards one of the really massive changes that I've observed and that we've observed over the past many years. And that is the IT, I'll call them the buyer, the owner, has changed, especially in the past 3 to 4 or 5 years as the hyperscale clouds have really become the hyperscale clouds. We saw it at Rackspace back in the early days of Rackspace. We would host a lot of marketing websites for companies that were being bought through the marketing department, not through IT. Then IT would have to come in and figure out how to integrate this stuff. Well, that really went at scale once people moved to AWS and to Google and to Microsoft. And so the buyer has changed. And ultimately, then it also means that the role of the CIO and the application owners have changed as well. They now are working so much closer in partnership with the business units as opposed to a command and control position back inside of IT. They've got to be so much more in tune with what the business requirements are while still ensuring that, we're still backed up, making sure we've got all the security that we have in place and integrating all of these providers. In fact, we've done some interesting research over the past year that we commissioned out. And when we look at what we call our future of compute, where we went out and interviewed over about 1,700, 1,800 business decision makers inside of organizations and IT professionals in 10 different countries, what we found was that first choice for where somebody's going to put things right now is in a SaaS-based offering. If it is a key application and a differentiator for the organization, they're going to develop it themselves and they're going to try to actually even manage and control it themselves. But if there's no differentiation, they're going to look to some kind of a provider. They're going to look to a quote unquote off the shelf, even though that may mean SaaS or an offering along those lines.
So, Jeff, when we start, your PR people have been great. They gave me all kinds of good stuff. You had an awesome article in Forbes. We'll get to that in a second. But you also referenced an analogy borrowed from the architectural world, the American Society of Landscape Architects, where they started talking about children on playgrounds. I love this analogy. Tell us about it.
Well, when and I'm really glad you called that out. The reason is when you think about letting somebody out to play, and I'll tell the story. So here's the analogy. The analogy is that when creating playgrounds, there are two ways you can go about that. Of course, you want to have a great playground, but there's the decision and the question: do you put a fence around it? And you would have some forward thinkers who would say, "No, we don't want any fences around there. We want their imaginations to go crazy." And what they found was that when they would design a playground like that, the kids just kind of huddled in the corner. They didn't play all that much. They didn't do that much stuff. Because they could do everything, consequently, they sort of did nothing. But when the playground had some boundaries around it, well, then what they found was the kids with those boundaries then would go and have a great time. Their imaginations were actually more unlocked when they knew the boundaries where they could play. And what we find that when we think about IT and we think about what we can do and we can't do, we don't want to just open up the keys to the kingdom. There needs to be some boundaries, because those boundaries then let you know what the playing field is and where you have to operate. In the same context, and we'll go back to Curtis's question when we think about the changing face of IT and how now IT has actually got to go out and understand what the business requirements are and the performance requirements and what those business outcomes, well, then IT can really come to the table with a real solution.
Well, I'm going to bring one of my examples. I was chief computer scientist for GSA Office of Information Security for a while, and over the years, I wrote specs. And one of the things I found is in the government, we tend to write large amounts of specifications and give you lots and lots and lots of exactly what we want. But on the other hand, I've also did a whole bunch of requests for proposals where instead of spelling out every last little widget, I said, okay, within this fence, this box, what can you create for me? And how much are you going to charge me for it? Is this the approach that we might want to seriously think about with our IT groups?
I think it absolutely is. You leave some flexibility in there for the professionals to be the professionals. So set the framework, set the boundaries of what it is you need to accomplish, when it needs to be accomplished, what the boundaries are. Are there geographic? Let's get back into cloud. Are there geographic boundaries where my data has to reside? Well, maybe the cloud, public cloud might not be the right solution there. Maybe we do have to think about a single tenant type of a cloud where I can point at a street address and I can point at it on a map and prove to the regulators where that is. Is that a requirement? Is that a boundary? Because if all somebody's going to ask is say, well, I need to have this much compute power and this much networking and this much storage, well, I'm going to find a way to make that as cheap as possible to win the bid, but I need to understand what the requirements are. So yes, that's exactly what we're talking about. Let's create the framework and then let the super smart people really be able to shine. Besides, then you're just not looking for the lowest bidder on a project. You're looking for the best solution that is at the right financial model.
Well, you're talking about the financial model. And I think it's interesting that there are a lot of people in business who pride themselves on their financial acumen, but then they don't go off and act in ways that are, well, in the best financial interest of the organization. I've heard that you had a conversation with the CIO of a major metropolitan area about this very thing. Can you tell us a little bit about that conversation you had and what it has to say to the people who are perhaps leading IT for a business organization?
Yeah, so that was the conversation I had with Ty Hayes, who was CTO of the city of Atlanta and is now interim CIO as well. And it was an amazing conversation. I was so impressed with her. She was actually an Air Force veteran, and really learned her discipline in that. Now incredibly well educated as well. And when she came into the city of Atlanta, while they had some standards, they would say, okay, we're gonna buy our desktop machines from this vendor. We're gonna buy cell phones from this vendor, and so forth. And they had budget for these sorts of things. Well, they didn't actually consolidate all of that buying power into a single location. And so you had duplicates of stuff. You had different pricing models depending on what organization you were in. She took an incredibly pragmatic approach and standardized that across the entire city, saved the city tons of money, not only in how they were acquiring this gear, but then also how they were able to support it because they had consistency across the entire organization. Another thing she did was she said, okay, now what are we really good at? What do we want to pride ourselves in? And what are we not good at? One of the things she decided that they didn't want to be good at, and we see this over and over from organization to organization, is they didn't want to run a data center. Data centers are things that are necessary, but not every company needs to operate one. You can have single tenant infrastructure running in a colo facility if you really still want to manage that stuff yourself. But you don't have to be in the business of raised floors and power and pipe and all of that sort of thing. In this case, the city of Atlanta has taken a private cloud and a public cloud approach, and they've got business requirements that really drive where different workloads tend to go. So a couple of examples of what Ty had to do over there and did in an excellent way.
I appreciate that. Some great knowledge there for pretty much everyone in an IT leadership position. Now, we have some more questions that we want to get to, but before we do that, we have one more ad. I'd like to go ahead and get Lou to talk about another sponsor, then we'll come back with our guest.
Thank you, guys. Well, I'll get you back to the interview in just a moment, but before we do have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Worldwide Technology and Dell Technologies. WWT's ATC platform brings together all the knowledge and resources you need to be confident that a solution is right for your organization. Their ATC lab contains more than $500 million in hardware and software from hundreds of technology companies. It provides real-time, tested proofs of concept tailored for every business, accessible anywhere and anytime. WWT uses their deep domain expertise and unique capabilities coupled with their ability to deploy solutions at scale to create new realities for their customers. By consistently delivering technology and business outcomes, they have established decades-long relationships with many of their customers. These organizations know WWT will help them achieve their goals. Their ATC is an incubator for IT innovation. Hundreds of on-demand and scheduled labs like Dell's VxRail, Cyber Recovery Solutions, PowerStore, Unity, PowerMax, Data Protection Central, and IDPA. These labs represent the newest advances in primary storage. Other labs in the ATC represent the latest advances in multi-cloud architecture, security, network, automation, primary and secondary storage, data analytics and AI, DevOps, and so much more. Learn about products before you launch. WWT's engineers use these environments to quickly spin up proofs of concept and pilots using the sandbox so customers can confidently select the best solutions. In many cases, this reduces concept time from months to weeks, which increases speed to market. They offer Lab as a Service, a dedicated space within the ATC. Here, customers can perform programmatic testing using the vast technology ecosystem that WWT has already built. It's virtual, so you can take full advantage of ATC's unique benefits anywhere in the world, 24/7. WWT's engineers work in these labs every day, beta testing new equipment and building reference architectures and customer integrations to help their customers make decisions and see results faster and with much less investment. WWT's ATC platform encompasses the entire lab ecosystem, which creates a multiplier effect of knowledge, speed, and agility available anytime, anywhere around the world for its customers and its partners. Access technical articles, insights, demonstration videos, white papers, hands-on labs, and other tools to help you stay up to date with the latest technology. While exploring the ATC platform, make sure you check out WWT's events and communities for opportunities to learn about technology trends and hear the latest research and insights from their experts. To learn more about WWT, the ATC, and become a member of their growing community, go to WWT.com/twit to create an account and gain access to their on-demand labs today. Let WWT help you reach better decisions faster. That's WWT.com/twit. WWT, bringing strategy and execution together. And we thank WWT for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now back to you guys.
Well, we're here with our guest, Jeff DeVerter, CTO of Rackspace. And Jeff, there's one technology that you haven't talked about that a lot of people love talking about right now. And I want to question you about it. Is Rackspace building giant piles of containers for people? Or are containers one of those just bright, shiny objects that's going to dazzle and distract everyone for a while, and then we'll move on to the next big thing?
That is an excellent question. Containers, I believe, are one of the keys to organizations being able to modernize their infrastructure. It is an amazing destination, and it's an amazing stepping stone as well. Let's talk about both of those for just a sec. So when you let's talk specifically what is a container. So a container, we think about computing over the years. So we started where we'd all just have a server, and all of our workloads would go on that server. But unfortunately, that's a highly, it's just not a great use of that device, because the load goes up, the load goes down. You got to spend a lot to have all those servers to do what you need to do. So along comes virtualization. Now, what virtualization does is it says, all right, now I'm going to take this one physical server, and I'm going to slice it up into 50 little, well, not that many, into 10 little servers. Let's call it 10. But on those little servers, you still have a full operating system, and then and all of the things you have to do with that operating system: secure it, patch it, back it up, all that sort of stuff. And then you put your application on there. And then, so that's that. So then when we talk about a container's similar in the way that a VM or virtualization takes a server or a hypervisor and slices it up. But in this case, we just take a single operating system environment, and now we slice up the runtimes. And what that does is it allows us to get much more dense utilization of that individual server, whether it's a VM or whether it's a physical server. So it's a great way to get greater density of workloads. But what it also does is it allows you to then carve up your application. Instead of having these large monolithic applications, we can now carve it up into component parts and put those component parts now into containers. What's the value, you may say? Well, when we have a large monolithic type of an application that has a couple of three tiers, let's say there's an application tier, a business logic tier, and then a data tier. Now, of course, on top of that is going to be networking. Beneath that's going to be storage. And so what you have then is on that application tier, that front tier, if you need more, if you're overloaded in the workloads, you've got to add more servers and more servers. If you want to update, more specifically, update that code, you have to do the entire chunk. When you start to break these monolithic applications down into their component parts, like into containers, we now can deal with that code as an individual unit. Now, it also when I say it becomes a great stepping stone to the cloud, is there's this age-old debate. Do I lift and shift my workloads out to the cloud? In other words, pick up my VMs and just move them out to Azure or cloud of choice? Or do I transform them to be more cloud native? Well, the stepping stone becomes containers. If I containerize my workload, now I don't have to choose, let's move it all at once out to the cloud, modified or not modified. Now I can actually even think about maybe I move just pieces of it out. And once those pieces get there, now I can start to think about how I might modernize them even more, utilizing, serverless-based technology or platform services that exist inside of that cloud. So I'm a huge proponent of containers. Rackspace loves containers. We support them here. In fact, we're relaunching our enterprise container offering here now in Q2. So you've got that coming. And really what that does is it provides consistency of containers across all of the clouds. And I say all clouds, meaning all public, and then, of course, VMware-based clouds as well. That's the other great benefit, Curtis, that you get with containers is some amazing portability. When you standardize on a single container methodology or container architecture, then you can more easily pick that up and move it around from cloud to cloud.
Well, Jeff, I want to pick up where we left off on this. We're talking futures, we're talking trends. Let's go take a pot shot at academia. I just came from a major Research One university, and I was a little frustrated. I actually ran my lab so I could balance real world with the ivory tower. If you were to jump up on a soapbox and say to academics that are teaching computer science, what's missing? What do you want to see?
That is a great question. Give me a second on this one. So the biggest area I think that's missing is academia has got to pay closer attention to what not just to the technology. That's what's missing. In fact, that's what's holding most businesses back from their transformation, their true digital transformation. And it's dealing with the people and with the process of how true modern computing really needs to be done. I talked earlier about how the IT buyer has changed, because what's happened is you don't have IT that lives over in building 4E and you got the rest of the business in the rest of the buildings around the campus. Now everybody's kind of intermingled together, and this happens across every discipline, whether it's around automation or an RPA or in how we're dealing with the marketing department. The marketing is a completely digital world these days, and these folks are dealing with piles of data that a computer scientist really should be working with. So when I think about academia and where academia really needs to double down and really rethink is, how do you get these students to work in effectively the pods that they're going to be working in when they get out there? Because how they're communicating, how they're working with one another, and the teams that they build are vital to the success. It's not just how great of a coder can I be? How great of a communicator can I be with the guy on my left who's a security person, or the lady on my right who is our data scientist? Because all of these folks now have to work within close, we'll call it virtual proximity, as close as any of us can work these days. But they've got to be within effectively arm's reach with one another to work together as a team. Remember the containers example where we break pieces of code down. Well, you know what? Security's got to be a first-class citizen in consideration into everything that's going on there. So for academia, stop compartmentalizing and think about the whole. Think about how you train. A lot of those are soft skills of pulling the right people together, and then what those new processes look like. When we move from monolithic applications to a DevOps mindset, an agile mindset, it's all brand new, and it's not the way things were done before. And there's a little psychology that those students need to have when they come out to work with some of us who've been in the industry for a couple of decades.
Boy, everything's new and changing. That's never been the case before. How will we cope? Well, one of the things we have to cope with here on TWiT is that we do have a finite amount of time for every episode, and I'm afraid we've just about run out of hours for this week. But Jeff, I would really like to give you a chance to tell our listeners where they can find out more about Rackspace. And if you have a blog or place where you share your thoughts, where they can follow and find out more about you.
Well, thanks so much. So, of course, you can always head over to rackspace.com. You can learn about all kinds of great stuff there. But I'm actually going to direct you to a subpage that I help curate over there. And it's rackspace.com/solve, SOLVE. Now, you're not going to find anything to buy there. What you're going to find is thought leadership pieces. You're going to find articles that we write inside of Rackspace that we curate. On the screen right now, you can see my podcast is there. It's called Cloud Talk. I'd love for you to check that out. Subscribe wherever podcasts are found. And I talked to really some interesting leaders. I just talked to the CTO of Microsoft US Americas yesterday. That'll be coming out in a few weeks. There's a really interesting series on there called The Tech Behind the Industry, where I look at different industries and how technology is impacting those. And if you want to learn more about me, of course, my name is Jeff DeVerter. So really anywhere on the socials, you can first initial last name, J DeVerter. So that's where you'll find me on Twitter. You'll find me on LinkedIn DeVerter as well, and always posting lots of stuff out there. So please feel free to check all those out. But I'd love to engage with you there. You can find all the contact information you need in those locations.
Well, Jeff, we've enjoyed having you as our guest today. Thank you so much for your time. And we will look forward to perhaps having you back in the future. I have a feeling there's a lot more we could talk about.
It would be my honor. Thank you so much for having me on today.
We also want to thank you, our listener. You know, we say it pretty much every week that we could not and would not do this without you. We really appreciate you being here. If you're one of the people who downloads our podcast on your favorite podcast catcher, if you're someone who is here on Friday afternoon when we record live and are taking part in the live discussion, we appreciate you as well. So this is just about time. Before we head off into the sunset, I do want to thank my co-host, Brian Chee. Brian, what's coming up with you for the coming week?
Well, the chat room has been waiting with bated breath on my wife and I moving into our forever home, which is, funny enough, just down the street from Curtis. We're going to be neighbors, which will be really awesome. Can you imagine all the trouble the two of us could get into when we're in the same city? Anyway, you know, I'd really love to hear from you. I've had some amazing show ideas tossed at me. On Twitter, I am ADVNETLAB, Advanced Net Lab. Or you're also more than welcome to throw me email. I am Cheebert, and that's spelled CHEEBERT @twit.tv. But you know, it's probably better to throw it at TWiT @twit.tv, and that'll hit all the hosts. We'd love to hear from you. Take a pot shot at us. Our skin's pretty thick. If you didn't like something, tell us. There's lots of room for improvement. If you did like it, pat us on the back. Anyway, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your ideas, and we want to see you next week. Take care.
Thanks, Brian. And we can't go without thanking our tireless technical director, Ant Pruitt. What do you have going on? I know you don't just spend all of your time waiting for TWiT to come on the air. What's going on with you?
Well, sir, I have had a great old time continuing to create content for my show, Hands-On Photography. Great discussions this week with Mr. Freddie Clark. We talked about some food photography and talked about just the technical aspects of how to really make it shine and just look so scrumptious on the screen.
Thanks, Ant. As always, you've got some great content. Hope that everyone goes over and checks that out. Well, that's it for us for this week. Thanks for being here. And remember, if you want to know what's what in the world of enterprise tech, just keep TWiT.
You know what's fun? Android. You know what's even more fun, though? All About Android. That's my show, Jason Howell, along with my co-hosts Ron Richards, Florence Ion, and we welcome guests on each and every week from throughout the Android ecosystem, developers, Googlers, journalists, people who are all geeked out about the Android operating system. We tell you everything you need to know. twit.tv/AAA every Tuesday. We'll see you there.